and wrapped in static, spoke. "You moved your cup." My hand froze halfway to the cue button. Through the booth's window, the hallway stretched empty and dark. The parking lot outside held only my beaten truck. "Who is this?" The line went dead. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe they meant something else. Maybe I'd mentioned the coffee on air earlier without thinking, but I hadn't been on the mic in 2 hours. The second call came 20 minutes later. Same dead caller ID. "The cassette from the top shelf," the voice said. "Third one from the left. It's about to fall." I spun in my chair. Behind me, the wall of old broadcast tapes stood motionless. Then, as I watched, one tape, third from the left, top shelf, tilted forward and clattered to the floor. The line clicked dead before I could speak. That's when I noticed the clock. The analog clock on the wall, the one that had kept perfect time since the Carter administration, showed 3:10. But my watch read 3:17. 7 minutes gone, just like that. I should have left, packed up, walked out, driven through the night back to Albuquerque and never looked back. Instead, I picked up the fallen tape. The label, yellowed with age, read, "Quality Check, November 1982. My curiosity won over my better judgment. I slotted it into the old deck we kept for archival purposes. My own voice crackled through the speakers, though distorted by age and magnetic decay. But I was talking to someone, responding to questions I couldn't hear, laughing at jokes that didn't register on the tape. The conversation was one-sided, but clearly a conversation nonetheless. "Never thought about it that way," my voice said. "You're right about the signal. It does travel differently at night." A pause where the other person must have spoken. 3 years now, my recorded self continued. Ever since, well, you know, since Tommy. My blood turned to ice water. Tommy was what my brother called me. Nobody else ever used that nickname. And 3 years ago was when The phone rang again. This time I didn't answer. But after 5 rings, it stopped. And through the studio monitors, I heard the click of the phone system automatically routing to the on-air feed. We weren't supposed to be live. The board showed we were still in automation mode. "Tommy," the voice said through every speaker in the station. "The footprints lead to answers." That's when I saw them. In the dim hallway outside the booth, a trail of dusty footprints materialized as I watched, each one appearing with a soft puff of desert sand that shouldn't have been there. They led from the broadcast booth down the corridor toward the transmitter building. The transmitter building was a separate structure, connected by a 50-foot enclosed walkway. In 3 months, I'd never had reason to go there during my shift. The equipment ran automatically, monitored remotely by engineers who worked normal human hours. I followed the footprints. The hallway felt colder with each step, though the desert night outside still held summer's heat. The fluorescent lights flickered in sequence as I passed under them, creating a wave of darkness that chased me forward. The footprints continued appearing just ahead of my own steps, as if someone invisible was walking backward, leading me on. The door to the transmitter building stood ajar. Through the gap, I could hear the deep electrical hum of the transmission equipment, punctuated by something else, a rhythmic creaking, like rope under strain. I pushed inside. The transmitter room was a cathedral of obsolete technology, towers of equipment reaching toward the ceiling, their lights blinking in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. In the center of the room sat an old office chair, still rotating slowly as if someone had just stood up from it. The phone on the desk beside it was off the hook. I picked it up, knowing I shouldn't, knowing every instinct screamed at me to run. "Hello, Tommy." The voice was clearer now, without the static, familiar in a way that made my chest tight. "How do you know that name?" "You gave it to me, don't you remember? All those late nights, talking about the signal, about how it travels differently in the dark, about how certain frequencies can breach the veil." "I've never, not yet, but time moves differently here. The signal doesn't just travel through space, Tommy. It travels through everything. Past, future, the spaces between." The chair started spinning faster. "What do you want?" To finish our conversation, the one we've been having for 3 years, the one we're going to start having 3 years ago, the one where you tell me about your brother. My mouth went dry. My brother is dead. Yes. Motorcycle accident on Highway 285. Never got to tell you where you'd end up working. Never got to know about this place. But he knew your nickname. He's the only one who ever called you Tommy. The lights in the transmitter room began to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. You're not my brother. No. But I know things only he would know. Like how you blamed yourself for not being there. How you took this job to punish yourself with isolation. How you talk to him sometimes late at night when you think the dead might be listening. The footprints began appearing again, circling the chair, leaving trails in dust that shouldn't exist in a sealed room. The dead don't listen, I whispered. But something else does. Something that lives in the spaces between frequencies. Something that's been recording every word, every thought broadcast into the dark. And sometimes, Tommy, sometimes it broadcasts back. I ran, burst through the door, down the hallway, past the booth where my own voice still played from that old tape, out into the parking lot where my truck waited under stars that seemed too bright, too close. But when I reached for my keys, I found a cassette tape in my pocket, one I'd never seen before. The label read, "Quality check, tonight." I drove home in silence, the tape burning like a coal in my pocket. I didn't return for my next shift, or the next. I never went back to KXNM, but sometimes, late at night, my phone rings. The caller ID shows all zeros, and sometimes, God help me, I answer. The voice always knows things it shouldn't. What I had for dinner, what book is on my nightstand, what I whispered to my brother's photograph just moments before. And every time I hang up, I check my pocket and find another tape. Each one labeled with dates that haven't happened yet, conversations I haven't had, my voice talking to someone who doesn't quite exist. Last night, the voice told me something new. It said the signal is getting stronger. Said soon I won't need the phone at all. Said it's been practicing my voice, learning from all those recordings, all those late-night conversations with the dark. Said it's almost ready to broadcast on its own. I've stopped checking the time when the calls come, stopped noticing when minutes go missing. The footprints appear in my apartment now, dusty trails that lead nowhere and everywhere at once. The chair in my living room spins when I'm not watching. 3 months ago, I thought isolation was my punishment. Now I understand it was my protection. Because whatever I let in at that station, whatever heard my calls into the dark, it doesn't just listen anymore. Sometimes when the static on my radio clears just right, I hear my own voice, having conversations I don't remember, talking to someone who sounds almost like my brother, if my brother's voice could travel through spaces that shouldn't exist. The voice on the phone tells me not to worry, says soon I'll understand, says time is just another frequency, and all frequencies can be tuned if you know how to adjust the dial. I want to believe it's lying. I want to believe I'm losing my mind, because the alternative, that something is using my voice, my memories, my guilt to build a bridge between what is and what shouldn't be, is worse than any madness. The phone is ringing again, midnight on a Tuesday that feels like every Tuesday since time stopped making sense. The caller ID shows all zeros. This time, when I answer, I hear two voices, both of them mine. One from now, one from then, or maybe when. They're having a conversation about the weather, about coffee, about the footprints in the hall, about how my brother would have loved this job, if my brother had ever existed at all. I set the phone down without hanging up. Let the voices talk. Outside my window, the radio tower I can suddenly see, though there was never a radio tower there before, blinks in patterns that spell out words in Morse code. Tommy, signal. Soon. The chair in my living room is spinning faster now. The dusty footprints are climbing the walls. And somewhere, in a station that might exist, at a time that might be now, a voice that might be mine is taking calls from the dark. The static is clearing. The signal is getting stronger. And I'm starting to remember conversations that haven't happened yet. Story 2. The keys felt wrong in my hand, too warm, as if someone had been holding them moments before I found them on my doormat. I'd been living alone in the Blackstone Arms for 3 months when the disturbances began. The building squatted on Chicago's north side like a brick tombstone, its Gothic revival architecture more suited to housing gargoyles than humans. My apartment on the 3rd floor came cheap, which should have been my first warning. In this city, nothing good comes cheap without strings attached. It started with the coffee mug. I'd left it on the kitchen counter before heading to bed, half full of cold brew I'd forgotten to finish. When morning crawled through my windows, the mug sat perfectly centered on the hallway windowsill, aligned with surgical precision to the edge. The coffee inside had been replaced with water, clear, odorless, body temperature water that made my skin crawl when I touched it. I told myself I'd moved it myself. Sleepwalking, maybe. The mind plays tricks when you live alone, when the only sounds at night are the settling bones of an old building and the distant wail of sirens. But then came the books. My dog-eared paperbacks, scattered across the living room, would migrate overnight to form neat towers by the radiator. My mail, tossed carelessly on the entry table, would fan out in chronological order. Even my shoes began arranging themselves by the door, laces tucked inside, toes pointing toward the exit. The building superintendent, a weathered man everyone called Kowalski, assured me the apartment above mine, 4B, had been empty for months. Scheduled for gut renovation, he'd said, producing a crumpled work order. Asbestos removal, then full demo. Nobody's been up there since July. Yet every night at 3:17 a.m., I heard them. Footsteps, deliberate measured paces that traced a path from what would be their kitchen to their bedroom. Back and forth, like someone pacing while deep in thought. I started sleeping with my phone recording, capturing the rhythm of those phantom steps. The playback revealed more, the metallic song of keys jingling, a whisper too low to decipher, and 3 sharp knocks that seemed to come from inside my own walls. I began documenting everything. Photos of objects before bed, photos when I woke, timestamps, measurements. The wine bottle I'd left on the coffee table had moved exactly 7 inches northeast. The stack of unopened bills redistributed themselves alphabetically by sender. My razor, which I always left by the sink, appeared balanced on the toilet tank, its blade open at a precise 45-degree angle. The compulsion to understand consumed me. I installed a motion sensor that never triggered. I dusted for fingerprints and found only my own. I even scattered flour across the kitchen floor one night, hoping to catch footprints. In the morning, the flour had been swept into a perfect circle in the center of the room, with my missing coffee mug placed exactly in its center. 3 weeks into this madness, I heard something new. Not from above, but from the hallway. A sliding sound, like paper being pushed under a door. I crept from bed, my bare feet silent on the cold floor, and peered through the peephole. The hallway stood empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of dying fluorescence. But there, on my doormat, lay a manila envelope. Inside, photographs. Dozens of them. All of me. Me sleeping, mouth slightly open, sheets twisted around my legs. Me cooking dinner, captured through my kitchen window from an impossible angle. There was no building across from mine, just empty air and a 3-story drop. Me in the shower, the image foggy but unmistakable. And worst of all, me examining the previous night's disturbances. My face a mask of confusion and growing fear. The last photo showed me holding the envelope itself, looking at the pictures. I spun around, searching my apartment for cameras, for any explanation. Nothing. That's when I found the keys. They lay where the envelope had been, still warm to the touch. A simple ring with 3 brass keys and a paper tag, the kind you'd find in an estate sale or lost and found box. Written in careful block letters, 3B, yours. My apartment was 3A. There was no 3B. I'd walked this hallway 100 times. The 3rd floor had only 4 units. 3A, mine. 3C, an elderly woman who kept cats. 3D, empty for months. And 3E, a young couple who fought constantly. No 3B existed on any floor plan, any directory, any memory of this building. But the keys insisted otherwise. I stood in the hallway at 2 a.m., keys clutched in my sweating palm, staring at the wall between my apartment and 3C. Faded wallpaper, water stains bleeding through like old bruises. Nothing more. Yet when I pressed my ear against it, I heard something impossible. The low hum of electricity, the whisper of ventilation, the unmistakable presence of space where there should be none. My fingers found a seam in the wallpaper, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. The largest key slid into what I'd always assumed was a painted-over electrical outlet. The lock turned with well-oiled silence. A door opened where no door should exist. The smell hit me first. Not decay or must, but something worse. The scent of my own apartment, concentrated and recycled, like breathing your own breath from a plastic bag. The service closet stretched before me, narrow and deep, lit by a single bare bulb that buzzed with insect intensity. Boxes lined metal shelving units, each labeled with dates stretching back years before I'd moved in. I pulled one down, hands trembling. Inside, my utility bills, some paid, others overdue, all dated from futures that hadn't happened yet. Electric bills from next month, gas bills from next year, a final notice from 3 years hence. The next box held photographs, hundreds of them, all of me in this apartment. But my hair was longer in some, shorter in others. I wore clothes I didn't own, had furniture I'd never bought. In one, I stood by a window that didn't exist, looking out at a Chicago skyline that seemed wrong. Buildings in the wrong places, the lake on the wrong side. Deeper in the closet, I found journals in my handwriting, describing days I hadn't lived, conversations I hadn't had, fears I hadn't yet developed. One entry, dated 6 months from now, described finding the keys. Another, dated 2 years ago, described the exact panic I felt in that moment, reading words I'd never written. The final box sat alone on the bottom shelf, newer than the others, untouched by dust. Inside lay a single videotape, the old VHS kind, labeled simply Orientation. I didn't own a VCR, hadn't seen one in years. But there, in the corner of the closet, sat a small TV VCR combo, the kind you'd find in a 1990s motel. The power cord snaked into the wall through a hole that shouldn't exist, drawing electricity from somewhere impossible. The tape clicked into place with mechanical certainty. Static gave way to an image of my apartment, but cleaner, emptier, wrong. The camera panned slowly, revealing subtle differences. An extra window, a hallway that bent left instead of right. And there, sitting on my couch, was someone who looked exactly like me. He spoke directly to the camera, to me. His voice my voice, but pitched slightly wrong, like a recording played at 95% speed. If you're watching this, you found the keys. Good. The previous tenant left them for you, just as you'll leave them for the next. The apartment you think you're renting, 3A, that's just the surface. You're actually in 3B, always have been. 3B exists in the spaces between spaces, in the moments between 316 and 318, in the photographs taken between blinks. The me on the screen stood, walked toward the camera. His eyes were my eyes, but older, more tired, full of terrible knowledge. The building needs a caretaker, someone to maintain the boundaries, to keep the apartments from bleeding into each other. That's why your things move. You're not being haunted, you're being trained. Every object you find relocated is practice for the real work. Soon you'll understand how to fold space, how to step through walls, how to exist in multiple apartments simultaneously. He held up a ring of keys, dozens of them, all brass, all worn smooth by countless hands. The footsteps you hear above you, that's you, 3 months from now, learning to walk between floors. The whispers, you, practicing the words that keep the building stable. The knocks, you'll understand those last. They're not a warning, they're a countdown. The image began to distort, stretching like taffy. Through the static, I heard my own voice, speaking words I hadn't yet learned. Check your pocket. My hand moved without conscious thought. In my jacket pocket, the jacket I was certain had been empty, lay another key. Silver this time, newer, with a tag that read, 4B, tomorrow. The videotape ended with a soft click. When I ejected it, the label had changed. Now it read, orientation completed. I backed out of the closet, my mind reeling, unable to process what I'd seen. The door swung shut on its own, the seam in the wallpaper disappearing like it had never existed. But the keys remained in my hand, warm and real and impossible to deny. That was 3 days ago, or maybe 3 weeks. Time moves differently now that I know the truth. I've started hearing new sounds, not just from above, but from below, from beside, from inside the walls themselves. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, figures that look exactly like me, performing tasks I'll eventually understand. This morning, I found my coffee mug on the windowsill again. But this time, I remembered moving it. Or rather, I remembered that I will remember moving it, once I learn how to reach through time the way the building requires. The orientation video was right about one thing. The knocks aren't a warning, they're a countdown. But not to something ending, to something beginning. Last night, at 3:17 a.m., I heard the footsteps above me stop. Then, for the first time, I heard them on the stairs, coming down. The sound of keys jingling grew louder, closer. 3 knocks echoed through my apartment, not from the walls, but from inside my own skull. I opened my door to find myself standing in the hallway, older, wearing clothes I don't yet own, holding keys I haven't yet received. I smiled with exhausted recognition. Time to start your real training, I told myself. The building has accepted you. He handed me a new set of keys. The tags read dates instead of apartment numbers. Yesterday, tomorrow, never, always, and one that simply said, now. I took them. What else could I do? They were already in my pocket, had always been in my pocket, would always be in my pocket. The building needs its caretaker, and the caretaker needs the building. We exist in the spaces between spaces, maintaining boundaries that no one else can see. I still live in 3A. I've always lived in 3A. But now I also live in 3B and 4B and all the other apartments that exist between the walls, between the seconds, between the photographs of reality that most people mistake for reality itself. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind. But then I remember, I can't lose something I've already found, will find, am finding in the endless loop of 3:17 a.m., where the footsteps never stop because they never started, where the keys are always warm because they're always being held, where the coffee mug moves itself because I move it, have moved it, will move it, in the eternal now of apartment 3B. The building keeps its secrets, and I keep the building, or perhaps it keeps me. In the end, there's no difference. The keys grow warm in my pocket, ready for the next tenant who'll find them on their doormat, wondering why they feel like someone was just holding them. Because someone was, someone is, someone will be. Welcome to the Blackstone Arms. We've been expecting you. Story 3. The first time I noticed the footprints, I convinced myself they were mine from the previous patrol. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, transforming Glacier National Park into an ocean of white silence. Yet there they were, wet impressions climbing the vertical face of Devil's Crown Ridge at an angle that defied physics. They ascended 40 feet of sheer rock, turned sharply left, then descended along the exact same path, as if something had been testing the route, measuring it, learning it. I stood there for 20 minutes, my breath forming clouds that dissipated into the thin mountain air, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. The tracks were human-sized but wrong somehow, the heel too narrow, the toes splayed at uncomfortable angles. Water pooled in each depression despite the sub-freezing temperature. And when I bent close, the liquid smelled of copper and pine sap, mixed with something medicinal, like the antiseptic they used in the hospital, where my mother spent her final months. Being a substitute ranger meant inheriting problems nobody else wanted to handle. The regular ranger, a weathered woman whose name I never learned, had taken sudden medical leave 3 weeks into winter. The head office in Kalispell mentioned something about exhaustion, but her eyes in the handover photo suggested something else, a recognition of things better left unexamined. My cabin sat 12 miles from the nearest plowed road, accessible only by snowmobile when the weather cooperated. The isolation suited me fine. After my divorce, after losing the teaching position, after the accusations that were dropped but never forgotten, I needed distance from everything human. The Park Service didn't ask many questions when you volunteered for winter duty in the backcountry. They assumed anyone willing to spend 5 months alone in these conditions had their reasons. The radio crackled that first night, cutting through the silence with surgical precision. I was cataloging supplies, trying to determine what the previous ranger had used and what remained, when the static resolved into a voice. No, not quite a voice. More like the memory of words, syllables arranged in patterns that suggested meaning without providing it. 47.392, 113.856. Coordinates. I wrote them down reflexively, my hand moving before my brain engaged. The transmission repeated twice more, each iteration slightly different, as if someone were reading from a document being edited in real time. When I plotted the points on my GPS, they led nowhere. Blank spaces on the topographical map where nothing should exist. Over the following days, more coordinates arrived at irregular intervals. Sometimes they came at dawn, sometimes at 2 in the morning, jolting me from sleep. I began keeping a notebook beside the radio, filling pages with numbers that mapped to impossibility. On the 4th night, curiosity overwhelmed caution. I connected the points with pencil lines and my hand began trembling. The pattern was unmistakable, the exact floor plan of my childhood home in Ohio. Not similar or approximate, but precise to the inch. The master bedroom where my father had his first stroke. The basement stairs I'd fallen down at age 7, breaking my collarbone. The kitchen where my mother made blueberry pancakes every Sunday until the diagnosis changed everything. I told myself it was coincidence, pattern recognition gone haywire in an isolation-addled brain. But the next morning brought new tracks in impossible places, circling my cabin at a perfect radius of 30 feet, maintaining that exact distance despite trees, rocks, and elevation changes. They went over obstacles rather than around them, as if the walker existed in a different relationship with physical space. The wind chimes appeared on my 8th day. I heard them first, a crystalline melody that shouldn't have existed in the muffled world of deep snow. They hung from the pines in a rough circle a quarter-mile from my cabin, dozens of them, each constructed from materials that had no business being here. Surgical steel, colored glass, bones that looked too delicate to be from any animal I knew. When I approached, they rang in unison, a harmony that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. The sound wasn't quite music and wasn't quite speech, occupying some liminal space between the two. I followed their trail deeper into the forest, each set of chimes leading to the next, like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, written by someone who'd forgotten how fairy tales were supposed to end. The trail terminated at Avalanche Overlook, a jutting platform of rock that provided panoramic views of the valley below. On clear days, you could see for 50 miles. But this wasn't a clear day. Fog had rolled in while I walked, reducing visibility to 20 feet. And there, at the overlook's edge, sat a backpack. My backpack. Or identical to mine, down to the University of Ohio patch I'd sewn on freshman year and the burn mark from a campfire in Yellowstone. Inside I found a journal filled with my handwriting, but the entries were dated tomorrow, next week, next month. They described patrols I hadn't taken, encounters I hadn't had, decisions I hadn't made. The tomorrow entry was specific. Found more tracks today. They're getting bolder, coming closer. Radio picked up coordinates for the old growth grove near Mineral Creek. When I get there, I'll find the first body. I should have left then, packed what I could carry, fired up the snowmobile and never looked back. But something in the journal's certainty, in its casual assumption of my future actions, triggered a defiance I hadn't felt in years. I wouldn't go to Mineral Creek. I'd break whatever pattern was being established. That night, the radio screamed coordinates for 6 straight hours. I unplugged it, removed the batteries, even buried it in snow outside the cabin, but the numbers kept coming through the speakers with crystalline clarity. They weren't random anymore. They traced routes through the park, paths that spiraled inward like water circling a drain, all converging on Mineral Creek. I didn't sleep. Instead, I studied the journal from the overlook, reading my future history by lamplight. The entries grew increasingly frantic as they progressed through time. By March, the handwriting barely resembled mine. Letters stretched and compressed as if written during an earthquake. The final entry, dated May 15th, consisted of a single line. I understand now. I've always been here. Morning brought a decision. I would go to Mineral Creek, but armed with knowledge of what I was supposed to find. The journal mentioned a body. I'd prove it wrong. Prove that the future it described was mutable, that I retained some agency in whatever was happening. The trek took 3 hours through deep powder that grabbed at my snowshoes like quicksand. The forest grew denser as I climbed, ancient Douglas firs and western hemlocks creating a canopy so thick that noon felt like twilight. The silence here was different. Not the peaceful quiet of fresh snow, but something actively suppressed, as if the forest were holding its breath. I found the grove exactly where the coordinates indicated, a circle of old-growth trees that had somehow survived the logging operations of the previous century. The trees were massive, their trunks wide enough that 6 people holding hands couldn't encompass them. And there, in the center of the grove, I found what the journal had promised. But it wasn't a body. It was bodies. Dozens of them, all wearing ranger uniforms from different eras, all in various states of preservation that didn't align with decomposition patterns. Some looked fresh, others mummified, still others reduced to bones, but all arranged in a spiral pattern that mirrored the coordinates I'd been receiving. I approached the nearest one, a ranger whose uniform style dated from the 1970s. The name tag read Morrison, and below it, a photograph ID showed my face. Not similar to mine, but actually mine, down to the scar above my left eyebrow from the bicycle accident when I was 12. The next body, dressed in 1950s gear, bore the name Whitman, but again showed my face. Every single body in that spiral was me, had always been me, would always be me. The radio at my belt, the one I'd left buried in snow at the cabin, crackled to life. "Welcome home," it said in my voice, but aged, weathered by decades I hadn't lived. "You're early this time. Usually takes you another week to find us." I ran, stumbled and crashed through the snow, leaving rationality behind in that grove of recursive death. The forest seemed to fold around me, distances compressing and expanding with dreamlike logic. Trees I'd passed minutes before appeared ahead of me. My own footprints crossed my path at impossible angles. When I finally reached my cabin after what felt like hours but what my watch claimed was 17 minutes, I found it occupied. Someone sat at my desk, writing in my journal with my pen. They wore my clothes, had my posture, but when they turned, the face was wrong. Not different, just wrong, as if someone had tried to reconstruct my features from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. The thing that wasn't quite me smiled. Its teeth were perfect, too perfect, like dentures or a dental diagram come to life. It spoke in my voice, but the words arrived a fraction of a second before its mouth moved, like a badly dubbed film. "You can't leave," it said conversationally, returning to its writing. "None of us ever leave. We just arrive again earlier or later, but always here, always now. The coordinates don't lead to places, they lead to times, and all times lead here." I backed toward the door, but my hand found only solid wall where the entrance should have been. The windows showed not the Montana wilderness, but other scenes. My childhood bedroom, my college dorm, the hospital where my mother died, all existing simultaneously in the same space, overlapping like double-exposed photographs. "The previous ranger," the thing continued, still writing, "she's you too. Everyone who's ever worked this post, everyone who ever will. We're all iterations of the same moment, the same decision to come here, to hide from the world. The park doesn't exist, not really. It's just the shape our isolation takes, the geography of our withdrawal. The wind chimes rang outside, their sound now clearly articulate, speaking in voices I recognized as variations of my own, younger, older, differently inflected by experiences I hadn't had yet or had already forgotten. They were calling me to the overlook again, to find another backpack, another journal, another revelation that would send me spiraling back to this cabin, this moment, this eternal recursion of self-discovery. I write this now, or have I always been writing it? In a journal I'm not sure is mine. The handwriting looks right, but I don't remember forming these words. Tomorrow, according to the entries I haven't written yet, I'll find more footprints, receive more coordinates, discover more bodies that are mine but not mine. The cycle continues, has always continued, will always continue. The radio speaks constantly now, not in coordinates but in memories, describing moments from my life with perfect accuracy, but in the wrong order, as if chronology were just another human construct that doesn't apply here. It tells me about my first kiss before I was born, my death before my marriage, my childhood after my retirement. Sometimes I see the others, the other me's, through the windows or in my peripheral vision. We nod at each other with weary recognition. We're all substitute rangers here, substituting for ourselves, replacing and being replaced in an endless shift change where every worker is the same person, at different points in a timeline that curves back on itself, like those impossible footprints on Devil's Crown Ridge. The wind chimes play constantly now, a symphony of selves. Their melody forms words if you listen long enough, the same words over and over. You're home. You've always been home. You can never leave home. I understand now why the regular ranger's eyes looked like that in the photograph. It wasn't exhaustion or fear, it was recognition. She saw what I'm seeing now, what we all see eventually. That there is no park, no cabin, no Montana winter. There's only the shape of our loneliness given form, the topology of our desire to disappear, made manifest in snow and stone, and impossible footprints that climb toward nothing and return by the same path. Tomorrow I'll wake up, and it will be my first day as a substitute ranger. I'll notice footprints in impossible places. I'll receive coordinates that map my childhood home. I'll follow wind chimes to an overlook where I'll find a backpack full of tomorrows I've already lived. Or maybe that was yesterday. Or maybe it's happening right now, has always been happening, will always be happening. In the eternal present tense of this place that exists outside of time, outside of space, outside of everything but the terrible certainty that I am home, have always been home, can never leave home. The radio crackles with new coordinates. I write them down automatically, my hand moving without conscious thought. When I plot them, they'll show the shape of something I recognize but can't quite name. Maybe a face, maybe a room, maybe the outline of a grief so deep it carved its own geography into the world. I'll investigate. I always investigate. That's what substitute rangers do. We substitute for ourselves, over and over, each iteration believing it's the first, each revelation feeling new despite having been discovered countless times before. The footprints outside my window climb the wall now, defying not just gravity but the very concept of direction. They spiral upward like smoke, like prayers, like the last thoughts of someone who came here to disappear and succeeded too well, became absence itself, a hole in the world shaped exactly like a person, like a ranger, like me. I am the substitute. I am the substituted. I am the substitution itself, the process by which something replaces itself endlessly, a human Mobius strip walking the same impossible path forever, leaving wet footprints in snow that never melts, following coordinates to a home that exists in no map, except the one carved into my bones, my brain, my breaking heart. The wind chimes sing my name in every tense, past, present, future, conditional, subjunctive, a conjugation of self that admits no escape, no alternative, no substitution except the endless substitution of myself for myself, here in this place that might be Montana, or might be nowhere, might be winter, or might be the season of my own unraveling, might be real, or might be the most elaborate geography of madness ever mapped. I write these words, have written them, will write them. You read them now, have read them, will read them. We are all here together, all alone, all the same person discovering that the coordinates always lead home, and home is the place you can never leave because leaving would require there to be somewhere else, and there is nowhere else, has never been anywhere else, will never be anywhere else. Only here, only now. Only the eternal substitution of self for self in a winter that never ends, in a park that doesn't exist, in a cabin that is every room you've ever feared to enter and never been able to leave. The radio speaks coordinates. I write them down. Tomorrow I'll follow them. Or was that yesterday? Or is it happening right now? Story 4. The spiral staircase light flickered once before steadying, and I remembered the owner's warning as clearly as if he were standing beside me in the narrow tower. Never turn it off after midnight. His weathered face had been deadly serious when he'd said it, though the rest of his instructions about the lighthouse rental had been delivered with the practiced ease of someone who'd given the same tour 100 times before. I'd laughed it off then, 3 days ago. Now, at 2:47 a.m. on my 4th night in this god-forsaken lighthouse on the Maine coast, I wasn't laughing anymore. The foghorn had been sounding for the past hour, its deep bellow cutting through the darkness at irregular intervals. That was wrong. I'd checked the mechanism myself after the first night. It was set to automatic, triggered only by actual fog conditions. Tonight was clear. Through the windows of the watchroom, I could see stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt, and the moon cast a silver path across the calm Atlantic. Yet the horn continued its mournful call. I descended the spiral stairs carefully, one hand on the cold iron railing, the other clutching my flashlight. The keeper's light, that's what the owner had called it, cast dancing shadows on the curved walls. It was just a simple bulb in an old brass fixture, nothing special except for the way it hummed. Everything in this place hummed, I'd noticed. The walls, the floors, even the air itself seemed to vibrate with some frequency just below hearing. The main lamp room was where I'd set up my writing desk. My laptop sat closed, its sleep light pulsing like a tiny heartbeat. I'd given up trying to write hours ago when the condensation had started forming on the inside of the lantern glass. At first, I thought it was just moisture from the sea air, but then I'd seen them. Handprints, small and desperate, appearing one by one on the interior surface of the glass. Between the prints, numbers had materialized in reverse. 7-4-1-9-5-3. I'd wiped them away twice already. They kept coming back. The foghorn sounded again, and this time I watched the mechanism. The arm swung precisely, pointing not toward the open sea where the shipping lanes ran, but toward a specific point northeast where my charts showed nothing but deep water. No rocks, no shoals, no navigation hazards of any kind. Just empty ocean. I pulled on my jacket and stepped outside onto the gallery that circled the lamp room. The wind should have been fierce at this height, but the air hung still and thick despite the clear sky. Looking down, I could see the rocky shore far below, waves breaking white against the stones in their eternal rhythm. The sound they made was wrong too, not the crash and retreat I'd grown accustomed to, but something more like whispers, countless voices speaking in unison just below comprehension. The rental had seemed perfect when I'd found it online. A week of solitude in a historic lighthouse, fully modernized with electricity and plumbing but maintaining its 19th century character. The perfect place to finish my novel. The owner had been accommodating, even eager, when I'd called. The price had been surprisingly reasonable. Just remember about the light, he'd said as he handed me the keys. The staircase light. Never turn it off after midnight. I'd asked him why, naturally. He'd looked out at the sea for a long moment before answering. It's been the rule since 1953. Every keeper, every tenant. We honor it. Back inside, I found new condensation on the lantern glass. This time, the handprints were on the outside. My phone showed 3:15 a.m. No signal, as usual. The lighthouse had a landline for emergencies, but something told me this wasn't the kind of emergency that could be solved with a phone call. I made coffee instead, using the ancient percolator in the small kitchen. The familiar routine helped steady my nerves. Water, grounds, heat, weight, normal things, rational things. The coffee was bitter and too hot, but I drank it anyway, standing at the window that faced the shore. The moon had shifted, and its light now illuminated the beach differently. That's when I saw them. Shells arranged on the sand in perfect lines, forming arrows that pointed directly at the lighthouse's base. They hadn't been there at sunset. I was certain of it. The foghorn sounded again, longer this time, and I noticed something else. The sound wasn't coming from the mechanism at all. It was coming from below, from somewhere deep in the lighthouse's foundation. I set down my coffee and grabbed my flashlight again. The stairs that led down from the main floor were narrow and steep, cut directly into the stone. I'd only been down there once, on the first day, to check the generator and water heater. It was a utilitarian space, all concrete and exposed pipes, lit by a single bare bulb that cast harsh shadows. The shells were here too, hundreds of them, arranged in the same arrow patterns, all pointing toward the eastern wall. I followed them, my footsteps echoing in the confined space. The arrows led to a section of floor I hadn't noticed before, a metal ring set into the concrete, partially hidden beneath decades of dust and grime. A trapdoor, one that definitely hadn't been mentioned in the tour. I knelt beside it, brushing away the debris. The metal was cold, colder than it should have been, and when I touched it, the humming in the walls intensified. The ring turned easily in my hand, as if recently oiled, and the door lifted without resistance. Below was darkness so complete it seemed solid. My flashlight beam couldn't penetrate more than a few feet, revealing only the beginning of another set of stairs, these carved from what looked like black stone. The smell that rose from the opening was ancient, salt and decay and something else, something organic and wrong. The foghorn sounded again, definitely from below now, and with it came a voice. Not speaking exactly, but something between singing and crying, rising and falling with the horn's bellow. The numbers from the lantern glass suddenly made sense. Not a date, but coordinates. Latitude and longitude. The exact spot where the foghorn mechanism pointed. I should have closed the trapdoor then. Should have gone back upstairs, packed my things, and left immediately. Breaking the rental agreement be damned. But writers are curious creatures, and I'd come here for inspiration. What better inspiration than a mystery? I descended. The stairs went down far longer than should have been possible. The lighthouse sat on solid rock. I'd seen the geological surveys and the historical documents the owner had left for guests. There shouldn't have been anything below the foundation but granite. Yet I counted 43 steps before reaching another floor. This room was circular, like the lighthouse above, but the walls were covered in something that wasn't quite stone. It looked organic, like the inside of a seashell, with the same iridescent quality that shifted in the beam of my flashlight. The humming was stronger here, and I realized it wasn't mechanical at all. It was breathing. The walls were breathing. In the center of the room sat a pedestal, and on it, a logbook. The leather cover was cracked with age, but the brass clasps still functioned. I opened it carefully, angling my flashlight to read the entries. They went back to 1953. Different handwriting, different keepers and tenants, but all describing the same things. The condensation, the shells, the arrows, and all of them had eventually found this room. The final entry was dated 3 weeks ago, just before my rental. They're not outside trying to get in. They're inside trying to get out. The light keeps them sleeping. When it goes dark, they remember what they are. I heard movement behind me and spun around. The stairs were gone. Where they had been was now smooth wall, breathing in rhythm with the rest of the room. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then died completely. In the darkness, the humming grew louder, and I understood. The lighthouse wasn't built to warn ships away from rocks. It was built to mark a prison, and I just locked myself inside with whatever had been kept here since 1953. The keeper's light. Of course, not the staircase light. The keeper's light. The one who keeps watch. The one who keeps them sleeping. I felt something brush against my hand in the darkness. Not quite solid, not quite liquid. It was warm and it pulsed with its own heartbeat. Or maybe it was mine. In the complete darkness, I couldn't tell where I ended and the room began. Time moves differently in the dark. Minutes or hours passed. I had no way to know. The breathing walls pressed closer, and I felt myself becoming part of them, my consciousness spreading out through the organic structure, touching other minds that had been absorbed before me, the previous tenants, the keepers. All of us now part of the lighthouse itself, eternal watchmen for something that must never wake. But then, light. Faint at first, filtering down from above. Dawn was breaking, and with it, the spell seemed to weaken. The walls pulled back, became stone again, and the stairs reappeared as if they'd never been gone. I scrambled up them, my legs shaking, my mind reeling from what I'd experienced or thought I'd experienced. The trapdoor slammed shut behind me, and when I turned to look, it was gone. Just smooth concrete where it had been, not even a seam to mark its existence. I climbed back to the main floor as the morning sun painted the ocean gold. My coffee cup sat where I'd left it, still warm. According to my phone, only 5 minutes had passed since I'd gone to investigate the basement. 5 minutes. But my notebook, the physical one I'd brought for handwritten notes, was filled with pages and pages of text in my own handwriting. Entries dated over the course of several years, all describing the same duty. Keep the light on. Keep them sleeping. Keep the watch. That was yesterday. Or today. Time has become fluid since I found the room. I've tried to leave twice, but my car won't start, and the owner's phone number is disconnected. The Coast Guard boat that usually passes every afternoon hasn't appeared. Even the seabirds avoid this place now. Tonight, the condensation has started again. New numbers this time. 4-5-3-2-1-7. Different coordinates. A different prison, perhaps, or maybe the same one from a different angle. The foghorn has been sounding all day despite the clear weather, and the shells have arranged themselves into new patterns on the beach. Not arrows this time, but words in a language I almost understand. The keeper's light is humming louder now. The sun is setting. In a few hours, it will be midnight again, and I'll face the same choice. Keep the light on and remain the guardian of something unspeakable, or turn it off and find out what exactly I've been keeping at bay. I think I already know what I'll choose. What I've already chosen, perhaps, in all the timelines that exist simultaneously in this place. The lighthouse doesn't just mark a prison, it is one. And I'm both the guard and the prisoner, the watcher and the watched. The owner knew. That's why the rental was so cheap, why he was so eager. He'd been the keeper before me, and now it's my turn. The lighthouse needs its guardian, and the guardian needs the lighthouse. We're symbiotic now, or parasitic. I can't tell which anymore. I've stopped trying to write my novel. Instead, I write in the logbook, adding my entries to those who came before. We're all still here, in a way, our consciousness woven into the humming that fills this place. Sometimes I hear their voices in the walls, warning me, instructing me, welcoming me to our eternal watch. The light must stay on. That's all that matters now. The sun has set. The condensation is spreading across all the windows now, not just the lantern glass. The handprints are getting larger, more desperate. The numbers keep changing. Coordinates to places that shouldn't exist. Depths that go beyond the ocean floor. I understand now why the owner mentioned 1953 specifically. That's not when the rule started. That's when something happened that made the rule necessary. Something that almost got out. Something that required a permanent guardian to ensure it never happens again. My laptop is dead. My phone too. Only the keeper's light remains constant. That eternal bulb that never burns out, never needs replacing. It feeds on something else. The presence of a living guardian, perhaps. My presence now. I can feel myself changing, becoming more like the lighthouse itself. Solid, eternal, necessary. My thoughts echo in the spiral of the stairs. My heartbeat syncs with the rhythm of the waves. When I look in the mirror, my eyes reflect light like the lantern glass. Tomorrow, someone will call about renting the lighthouse. I'll hear myself giving them the tour, showing them the modernized kitchen, the cozy bedroom, the perfect writing space in the lamp room. And at the end, I'll hand them the keys with the same warning. Never turn off the staircase light after midnight. They'll laugh just like I did. They'll learn just like I did. The lighthouse needs its keeper after all. And the keeper needs the light. Always the light. Forever the light. The humming never stops. End. Story 5. The first time I found the shopping carts lined up in front of Brenner's boutique, I thought it was teenagers playing a prank. Brenner's had been closed for 3 years, its windows still papered over with yellowing bankruptcy notices. But there they were, 7 carts arranged in perfect formation like soldiers at attention. Each one held a receipt, the thermal paper still warm to the touch, time-stamped 3:47 a.m. That was 12 minutes ago. I'd been working night maintenance at Fairfield Commons for 6 months, long enough to know every creak in the building's bones, every flicker of the fluorescent lights that never quite turned off. The mall had been dying slowly since 2018, hemorrhaging stores like a body losing blood. Now only a third of the shops remained open, their employees fleeing at 9 p.m. sharp, leaving me alone with the echoes. The security footage would show nothing unusual. I'd already checked. Just shadows sliding across the monitors like oil on water, shapes that seemed almost purposeful until you looked directly at them. Then they dissolved into ordinary darkness, the kind that pools in corners when most of the lights are dimmed for the night. I pushed the carts back to their corral near the defunct food court, trying to ignore how their wheels squeaked in unison, a metallic chorus that bounced off the vaulted ceiling. The receipts I stuffed in my pocket, though I knew they'd be blank by morning. They always were. The mannequins started changing clothes 2 weeks later. Victoria's Secret had closed in 2021, but management kept the mannequins dressed in the window, probably hoping to attract a new tenant. Every Monday morning without fail, they wore different outfits, not drastically different, just subtle changes that made my skin crawl. A scarf added here, a bracelet moved there, a blouse buttoned differently. The security cameras showed the usual nothing, just those liquid shadows pooling and dispersing throughout the night. I mentioned it once to Gary, the day security guard who took over at 6 a.m. He looked at me with the kind of pity usually reserved for relatives in nursing homes, then suggested I might want to cut back on the energy drinks. I didn't tell him about the other things. The sound of coins falling in the abandoned arcade started 3 weeks ago. Chuck E. Cheese had pulled out in 2020, leaving behind a graveyard of unplugged machines and prize counters thick with dust. But every night around 2 a.m., I'd hear it. The distinct metallic cascade of quarters tumbling into collection bins. The first time, I ran toward the sound, flashlight cutting through the darkness, only to find silence and that peculiar coldness that seemed to live in dead retail spaces. The claw machine still had prizes somehow. Stuffed animals that should have been removed years ago, their synthetic fur gray with neglect. But now they all faced backward, their button eyes turned away from the glass as if they couldn't bear to look out anymore. When I checked in the morning, they'd be facing forward again, expressions cheerfully vacant. It was the notes that really started getting to me. Every shift, I'd find one in my maintenance locker, written in handwriting I didn't recognize on paper that smelled faintly of mildew and something else, something organic and wrong. They contained evacuation routes, detailed floor plans with arrows and timing marks, but nothing matched the actual layout of the mall. The routes led through stores that had never existed, past escalators that went down to levels we didn't have. One night, I decided to follow them. The latest note had appeared while I was cleaning the restrooms near Macy's. When I returned to my locker, it was there, wedged between the door and frame like someone had been watching, waiting for me to leave. This one was different, simpler. Just a series of arrows drawn in, not a wall that had been built recently. This was old concrete, stained with decades of moisture. This was old concrete, stained with decades of moisture, with rebar poking through like broken bones. I ran my hand across it, feeling the coldness seep through my work gloves. It was solid, real, impossibly there. The mall's original blueprints were filed in the management office. I wasn't supposed to have access, but the night janitor knows every lock that doesn't quite catch, every door that can be coaxed open with the right wiggle of the handle. I spread the papers across the break room table, comparing them to the evacuation routes in the notes. The routes led to spaces between the walls, maintenance corridors that had been sealed off, sub-basements that were never built. Or were they? The blueprints seemed to shimmer when I looked at them too long, showing different layouts depending on the angle. I saw stores that had never existed, entire wings that stretched into impossible distances. The next Monday, the carts were back, but this time there were dozens of them. They formed a path from the main entrance to the center court, each one containing a receipt with a single item. Help. The timestamp was always the same, 3:47 a.m., no matter when I found them. I started noticing other things. The sound of footsteps on the level above, even though the second floor had been condemned since a roof leak 3 winters ago. Music playing from speakers that had, as if they were having silent conversations in the dark. Last night, I found another note. This one wasn't in my locker, but taped to the security office door. It was a work schedule, but not mine. It showed shifts for employees I didn't recognize, working in stores that weren't there. My name was on it too, but wrong, spelled differently, assigned to maintenance duties in areas the mall didn't have. The date at the top was from 1987, years before the mall was built. Or was it? I couldn't remember anymore. The mall's history seemed to shift like everything else, facts sliding around in my mind like the shadows on the monitors. Had it always been here? Had I always been here? The coins were falling again, but now they sounded like rain. I followed the sound past the arcade, deeper into the mall's dead zones where even the emergency lighting didn't reach. My flashlight caught something impossible. An escalator going down, its steps moving smoothly despite the lack of power. The service tag dated it to 1985. I descended. The lower level shouldn't exist, but there it was, a perfect mirror of the mall above, except older, wrong. The stores were all open, lights blazing, but everything was slightly off. Colors that hurt to look at, angles that didn't make sense, mannequins that turned their heads to track my movement. The music was louder here, the lyrics almost comprehensible but in a language that predated words. In the center court, I found them, all the employees who had ever worked the night shift. They were still working, still cleaning, still maintaining. Their movements were mechanical, repetitive, like they were stuck in loops. Some of them looked familiar, faces I'd seen in old employee photos in the break room. Others were me, dozens of versions of me, all in the same uniform, all pushing the same mop in perfect synchronization. One of them looked up, and I saw my own face, aged and hollow. He mouthed something I couldn't understand, then pointed to his receipt. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m., the same as always. But the date was tomorrow. I ran. Up the frozen escalator, through the impossible corridors, past the mannequins that reached for me with articulated fingers. The mall seemed to stretch and contract around me, distances meaning nothing, geography just a suggestion. I could hear them behind me. Footsteps, wheels squeaking, coins falling like rain. When I finally burst through an exit, not the cinder-blocked one, but a different door that hadn't been there before, I found myself in the parking lot. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky the color of old receipts. Gary's car was pulling in for the morning shift. He found me sitting on the curb, shaking, asked if I was all right, if I needed to go home sick. I looked back at the mall, and it looked normal, mundane, dying, real. Just a suburban shopping center past its prime, nothing more. But I still had the receipt in my pocket, the one from tomorrow, 3:47 a.m. I told Gary I was quitting, effective immediately. He shrugged, said they'd have my last check ready by Friday. As I walked to my car, I saw them in my peripheral vision, the other versions of me, still working their shifts in the spaces between the walls, in the mall that exists in the overlap between what was and what never was. I haven't been back, but sometimes late at night, I check the mall's website. It shows stores that closed years ago as coming soon, and lists events that happened in 1987, 1993, 2001, years that blend together like shadows on security monitors. The employment page has a night maintenance position open. It's always open. The timestamp on the posting never changes. 3:47 a.m. Last week, I got a text from an unknown number. Just coordinates and a time. The coordinates led to a mall in Michigan I'd never heard of. The time was 3:47 a.m. I didn't go, but I know I will. We all do, eventually. All of us who work the night shift, who maintain the spaces that exist in the gaps between real and not real, who clean up after customers who were never there. The malls are all connected, you see, not by highways or corporations, but by something else. Those maintenance corridors that were never built, those sub-basements that don't exist, those evacuation routes that lead nowhere and everywhere at once. We're the ones who keep them running, even after they die. Especially after they die. My replacement started last night. Gary told me when I came to pick up my check. Said the new guy seemed eager, enthusiastic even. I wanted to warn him about the carts, the mannequins, the coins that fall like rain. But I knew he wouldn't believe me. They never do, until they see the shadows moving with purpose, until they find the first note in their locker, until they descend the escalator that shouldn't exist. Besides, I'll see him soon enough. We all meet eventually, in the mall that exists at 3:47 a.m., maintaining the spaces between what is and what isn't, forever and never, in the fluorescent eternity of dead retail spaces. The receipt is still in my pocket. Tomorrow's date, same timestamp. I think I'll drive to Michigan tonight. Some of us never really leave the night shift. We just transfer to different locations, different versions of the same endless mall, cleaning up after shoppers who exist in the spaces between seconds, maintaining stores that closed before they opened. The gaffer tape arrows are already appearing in my apartment, leading from my bedroom to the front door. They'll be in Michigan too, I know, pointing the way to whichever mall needs maintenance in the spaces that don't exist. It's almost 3:47 a.m. now. Time to clock in. We all clock in, eventually. Forever. Story 6. The fluorescent lights in the lobby hummed their familiar death rattle, a sound I'd grown to hate over 3 years of night shifts at the Desert Palm Motel. Outside, the I-40 stretched like a black tongue through the Arizona desert, occasionally lit by the sweep of passing headlights. It was 2:47 a.m. when I first noticed room 112 showing occupied on the system again. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. According to our records, that room had been occupied for 6 weeks straight, yet I'd never seen anyone go in or out. The payment processed automatically every week, a credit card that always cleared, belonging to someone whose name appeared as just a blur of characters on my screen, like static given form. The master key hung heavy in my pocket as I walked down the exterior corridor. The desert wind carried the smell of creosote and something else, something damp that shouldn't exist in this dry climate. Room 112 sat at the end of the building, its window dark behind drawn curtains. I knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed too loudly in the night. Nothing. I tried the master key. It slid into the lock smoothly enough, but when I turned it, I met resistance. Not the mechanical resistance of a broken lock, but the deliberate opposition of a chain lock secured from inside. Through the 2-inch gap the door allowed, darkness pressed against me like a living thing. "Maintenance," I called out, though my voice came out smaller than intended. The darkness seemed to swallow the word whole. Then the intercom crackled to life back at the reception desk, its red light blinking like a diseased eye. I walked back, each footstep on the concrete seeming to echo from somewhere beneath me. When I picked up the receiver, static filled my ear for a moment, before a voice emerged, distant, underwater. "Ice, please. Room 112. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was the sound of someone speaking through layers of time, each word arriving from a different distance. I grabbed the ice bucket we kept behind the desk, filled it from the machine that groaned and protested, and made my way back to 112. This time the door stood open. Not wide open, just enough to suggest invitation. The darkness beyond the threshold seemed thicker than it should be, as if the room contained a different quality of night than the one surrounding me. I set the bucket down on the threshold and stepped back. "Your ice," I announced to the darkness. The bucket scraped against concrete as something pulled it inside. Not a hand. I would have seen a hand. The bucket simply retreated, leaving a wet trail that caught the corridor light. When I leaned forward to look, wet footprints led from the doorway back into the room, each one perfectly formed, as if someone had walked backward into that darkness. The door closed with a soft click. Back at my desk, I pulled up the phone records for room 112. The screen filled with calls, dozens of them, all placed to the reception desk. The timestamps made my hands go cold. 3:15 a.m., 3:47 a.m., 4:23 a.m., all from tonight, all during times when I'd been away from the desk making my rounds, delivering towels, checking the pool area. According to the log, someone in room 112 had called me 17 times tonight while I was somewhere else in the building. The security monitor flickered, drawing my attention. I had one camera that covered the corridor, including room 112. I rewound the footage to an hour ago, watching myself walk down the hall with the ice bucket. The playback showed me setting it down, showed the door open, showed the bucket disappear inside. But there was something else in the frame. A figure standing behind me in the corridor, mimicking my movements with a half-second delay, like a shadow that had gained independence. I rewound further. 3 nights ago, 4 a.m. The corridor was empty, but the door to 112 was open. A figure emerged. No, that's not right. The figure didn't emerge. It assembled itself from the darkness of the doorway, each part arriving from a different depth, creating a person-shaped absence in the air. It walked to the laundry room. I fast-forwarded, watched it return with an armload of sheets, watched it enter 112 again, where it dissolved back into the darkness like sugar in black coffee. My hands shook as I switched to the laundry room camera. Yesterday's timestamp showed me sorting linens, standard procedure. But there, in the corner of the frame, sheets marked 112 were folding themselves with invisible hands, each crease appearing with mechanical precision. They stacked themselves neatly on the shelf while I worked. Oblivious, my back turned to the impossible. The intercom crackled again. This time, I didn't answer immediately. I watched the red light blink, counting the pulses. They matched my heartbeat perfectly, as if the building itself had synchronized with my body. When I finally lifted the receiver, I heard my own voice. "Thank you for the daily service. Room 112 appreciates your attention." But I hadn't spoken. My mouth remained closed, dry as the desert outside. The voice continued, using my exact intonation, my slight Midwest accent that 7 years in Arizona hadn't erased. "We'll need fresh towels tomorrow. The old ones are starting to remember things they shouldn't." The line went dead. I looked at the phone log. No record of the call existed. According to the system, the last call from 112 had been 3 hours ago, during one of my absences. I scrolled through the log more carefully this time, and noticed something that made my stomach clench. Every call from 112 coincided with a gap in the reception desk footage, moments when the camera showed an empty chair where I should have been sitting. But I remembered being at the desk during those times. I had distinct memories of answering emails, filling out reports, drinking coffee that had gone cold. If I wasn't here, where was I? The security footage held more secrets. I found myself in it, of course, walking the corridors, checking doors, performing my usual duties. But there were inconsistencies. In one frame, I was walking toward the pool area. In the next frame, time-stamped 3 seconds later, I was at the opposite end of the building. No footage existed of me crossing the space between. Then I found something worse. Tuesday, 3:33 a.m. The camera showed me standing in front of room 112, master key in hand. I watched myself unlock the door, but the chain wasn't on. The door opened fully, and I walked inside. The timestamp ran for 47 minutes before I emerged, carrying linens that I took directly to the laundry room. I had no memory of this. I checked the other cameras from that time period. The reception desk, empty. The laundry room, there I was, washing and folding sheets with robotic efficiency. The pool area, also me, skimming leaves from the water. The parking lot, me again, checking car registrations. I was in 4 places at once, and I remembered none of them. The rational part of my mind, the part that still believed in cause and effect, suggested I check the employee schedule. Maybe someone else had covered for me, someone who looked similar enough to confuse me on the grainy security footage. But the schedule showed only my name, shift after shift, an unbroken chain of nights stretching back 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The same duration room 112 had been occupied. I forced myself to think back to when it started. What had I been doing 6 weeks ago? The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold water. I remembered clocking in, remembered the previous night clerk handing me the keys, remembered him saying something about room 112. What had he said? The memory fractured when I tried to focus on it, splitting into multiple versions of itself. In one, he warned me not to go near it. In another, he told me to take special care of its guest. In a third, he said nothing at all because he wasn't there. I'd been working doubles for months. All 3 memories felt equally real. The intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't just 112. Every room's light blinked in sequence. 101, 102, 103, a wave of red lights flowing down the board like blood through veins. When they reached 112, they all went dark simultaneously, leaving only that single red eye glowing. I didn't pick up the receiver. Instead, I grabbed the master key ring and headed for the room. This time I wouldn't knock. This time, I would see what lay beyond that darkness. The corridor stretched longer than it should have. I knew it was exactly 147 feet from the reception to room 112. I'd walked it thousands of times. But tonight, my footsteps accumulated without bringing me closer to the door. The numbers on the rooms repeated. 108, 109, 110, 109, 110, 109, 110, 111, 110, 111. When I finally reached 112, the door was already open. Not partially, but wide open, revealing a room that shouldn't exist. The space extended far beyond the motel's footprint, a corridor of its own that vanished into darkness. The walls were lined with security monitors, dozens of them, all showing the same feed. Me, standing in the doorway, looking at monitors that showed me looking at monitors that showed me looking at monitors, an infinite regression of observation. On the bed, if it could be called a bed, lay linens folded into impossible shapes, geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly. They seemed to be breathing, rising and falling with a rhythm that matched my own breath. The sheets from the laundry, I realized. The ones that remembered things they shouldn't. A phone rang somewhere in that impossible depth. Not the harsh electronic ring of the room phones, but something older, mechanical. The sound drew me forward. My feet moved without my permission, carrying me past the threshold. The door closed behind me with a soft finality. The monitors changed their display. Now they showed not me, but other night clerks. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all standing in this same room, all with the same expression of dawning horror I felt spreading across my face. Some were from decades ago, judging by their uniforms. Others wore clothes I didn't recognize, fashions that might have been from the future or from never. In the center of the room stood a desk, identical to the reception desk. Behind it sat a figure that might have been me, or might have been all of us, or might have been no one at all. It was sorting through registration cards, each one bearing the same information. Room 112, occupied, duration indefinite. "You're late," it said with my voice, with all our voices. The night shift started 6 weeks ago. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. They carried me to the desk where my hands, moving independently now, picked up a stack of fresh linens. I understood then. The night clerk who'd warned me about room 112, the one who'd told me to take special care, the one who hadn't been there at all, they were all me. Had always been me, would always be me. "The guests need their ice," the figure said, and I heard myself agree. I walked back through the door, but I didn't exit into the motel corridor. I emerged from room 109 carrying towels. Simultaneously, I emerged from room 114, pushing a cleaning cart. I was at the reception desk too, watching myself on multiple monitors, tracking my movements with growing alarm. I was the one calling from 112, requesting ice in a voice that was mine but wasn't, speaking from a temporal distance that made each word echo across weeks. The security footage would show me in multiple places because I was in multiple places. Had been for 6 weeks. Would be forever, maybe, trapped in a loop of service to a room that existed in more dimensions than a motel should contain. At the reception desk. Was I at the reception desk? Was this the real desk, or the one in 112? I looked at the employee schedule again. My name appeared, yes, but the dates were wrong. They showed past dates, future dates, dates that couldn't exist. February 30th, November 32nd, the 13th month of a year that hadn't been invented yet. The intercom crackled. I picked up the receiver with a hand that might have been mine. Room 112 needs ice, I heard myself say from 6 weeks ago. From tonight, from tomorrow. I grabbed the bucket. I walked down the corridor. I delivered the ice to myself, who thanked myself, who closed the door on myself. Then I was back at the desk, watching it happen on the monitors, documenting my own service in logs that would show impossible timestamps. The laundry room called to me next. The sheets needed washing. They'd absorbed too much time, too many overlapping moments of existence. I sorted them mechanically, muscle memory guiding my hands while my mind reeled. The linens from 112 felt different, heavier with accumulated presence, each thread containing multiple states of being simultaneously clean and dirty, folded and unfolded, existing and not. On the security monitor, I watched myself washing these same sheets yesterday. But I was also watching myself watch myself, standing behind my own shoulder in the laundry room, observing my work with the critical eye of management. How many of me were there now? How many had there always been? The phone at the desk rang, not the intercom, the outside line. I answered with professional courtesy that felt rehearsed across multiple iterations. Desert Palm Motel, how may I help you? I'd like to check in, the voice said. It was familiar. It was mine, calling from a payphone that I could see through the lobby window. I stood there, receiver in hand, watching myself stand at a payphone that had been removed 3 years ago, that was still there, that had never existed. Room 112 is available, I heard myself say, though the words felt like they were being pulled from me by invisible threads. Perfect. I'll take it for 6 weeks. The reservation appeared in the system, dating back 6 weeks, dating forward 6 weeks, existing in a temporal loop that had no beginning or end. I was the guest. I was the clerk. I was the service, the served, and the space between them. I understood now why the door was always chained from inside. I was protecting myself from myself, maintaining the barrier between the various iterations of my existence. But the chain was also an invitation, a gap that allowed just enough interaction to perpetuate the cycle. The master key in my pocket felt heavier now. It wasn't just a key to room 112, it was a key to every moment I'd existed there, every version of me that had stood at that threshold. When I'd turned it earlier, meeting resistance, I'd been turning it against my own hand on the other side, both of us trying to open and close the same door simultaneously. In the laundry room footage from 3 days ago, I spotted something new. While the sheets folded themselves in the corner, another me stood in the doorway watching. But behind that me stood another, and another, a line of night clerks stretching back through the doorway into impossible depth. We were all watching the sheets fold themselves, but we were also the invisible hands doing the folding, existing in the spaces between the camera's ability to perceive. The sun should have been rising by now. My shift should have been ending. But the darkness outside remained absolute, a night that had learned to persist beyond its natural boundaries. Time had become negotiable in the vicinity of room 112, and I was both the negotiator and the terms being negotiated. I walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot. My car sat in its usual spot, but it was also absent, having never arrived because I'd never left. The previous night clerk's car was there too, though I knew, remembered, would remember. that we drove the same vehicle. It was my car from 6 weeks ago, from tomorrow, from never. The intercom crackled one final time. All the lights on the board illuminated simultaneously, a constellation of need that spelled out a pattern I almost recognized. If I picked up the receiver, I knew what I would hear. Myself, requesting something I'd already delivered, thanking myself for service I'd already provided, existing in a loop of hospitality that had no guest and no host, only the endless exchange between them. I picked up the receiver anyway, or perhaps I'd already picked it up 6 weeks ago, or perhaps I would pick it up tomorrow. The temporal mechanics no longer mattered. What mattered was the voice on the other end, my voice, always my voice, saying words that I was speaking and hearing simultaneously. Room 112 is ready for you. I was. I had been. I would be. The night shift continued as it always had, as it always would. Somewhere in the Desert Palm Motel, a door stood partially open, held by a chain that protected the inside from the outside, or perhaps the outside from the inside. Wet footprints led backward into darkness. Fresh linens waited on shelves, remembering things they shouldn't. And I continued my rounds, checking doors, delivering ice, existing in multiple states of service to a room that might have been a door, or a mouth, or a mirror reflecting versions of myself I'd never meant to become. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar death rattle. Outside, the I-40 stretched like a black tongue through the Arizona desert. It was always 2:47 a.m. when I noticed room 112 showing occupied on the system. It always would be. Story 7. The first time I noticed the door, I'd been working the graveyard shift in the subway tunnels for 11 years. You'd think after that long, you'd know every rivet, every service hatch, every forgotten corner of the system, but there it was, between pillars 47 and 48 in the northbound service tunnel, a rusted metal door that hadn't been there the night before. I stood there, my headlamp cutting through the humid darkness, listening to the distant rumble of the last train heading to the yards. The door looked ancient, its surface pocked with rust that bled down the wall in orange tears. No number, no maintenance code, nothing to indicate it belonged to the Metropolitan Transportation Authority's meticulous inventory system. Just a semicircle of rust on the concrete floor, as if it had been swinging open and closed for decades. The rational part of my brain, the part that had kept me sane through countless midnight repairs, insisted I was looking at the wrong section of tunnel. But my work order was clear. Inspect track switches between pillars 45 and 50. I'd walked this exact stretch 3 nights ago. No door. I approached it slowly, my boots scraping against the gravel ballast. The air grew thick, almost viscous, carrying a sharp metallic tang that made my sinuses burn. Ozone. Like the smell after lightning strikes, but stronger, more concentrated. My hand reached for the radio, clipped to my belt, then hesitated. What would I report? That I'd found a door that shouldn't exist? The next train wouldn't pass for another hour. Plenty of time to investigate and document whatever this was. Probably just some forgotten access point from the system's earlier days, recently exposed by settling concrete. The explanation formed in my mind even as my instincts screamed against it. I pressed my palm against the metal, cold, despite the tunnel's oppressive warmth. The surface vibrated slightly, a thrumming that traveled up my arm and settled in my chest. Not from any passing train. The schedule was clear. This was something else. Something that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. That's when I saw the inspection tag hanging from a wire near the handle. Standard MTA yellow, filled out in black ink. My stomach dropped as I leaned closer to read it. My signature, my employee number, dated for next Tuesday. The tunnel spun slightly, and I had to brace myself against the wall. The tag couldn't be real. Someone was playing an elaborate prank, though I couldn't imagine who would go to such lengths. My coworkers barely acknowledged my existence during shift changes, let alone orchestrate something like this. I photographed the tag with my phone, the flash illuminating the impossible date, 7 days in the future. The image came out blurred, the numbers barely readable. as if the camera couldn't quite focus on something that shouldn't exist. A sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel, footsteps on gravel, measured and deliberate. I swung my headlamp toward the noise, but the beam revealed nothing except the endless perspective of tracks disappearing into darkness. The footsteps continued, growing neither closer nor farther, maintaining a steady rhythm that matched my own breathing. I backed away from the door, my hand finding the rough concrete wall for guidance. The ozone smell intensified, making my eyes water. As I retreated, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The distinct sound of a key turning in a lock, metal scraping against metal. But the door remained closed, unchanged, as if the sound had come from the other side, or from next week. The following night I returned to find the door gone, just smooth concrete wall between pillars 47 and 48, as if it had never existed. But the semicircle of rust remained on the floor, and when I knelt to examine it, I found my own boot print in the oxidized dust, a print that looked weeks old, though I'd stood there less than 24 hours ago. I started keeping a log, documenting each appearance. The pattern seemed random at first. 3 days present, 2 days absent, 1 day present, 4 days absent. But gradually, I noticed a correlation with the maintenance schedule. The door appeared whenever I was assigned to that section, as if it knew my rotations better than I did. My supervisor pulled me aside after 2 weeks. She looked concerned, studying my face with the expression reserved for workers who might be cracking under the stress. She said my coworkers had reported hearing me in conversations in the break room when I wasn't there. Not just my voice, but full dialogues, as if I was talking to someone who responded in words they couldn't quite make out. The strangest part was that I remembered some of those conversations. I could recall discussing the peculiarities of the older tunnel sections with someone whose face remained frustratingly vague, like trying to remember a dream after waking. But checking the schedule, I'd been home during those times, asleep in my apartment while my supposed doppelganger held court in the break room. I began recording myself during shifts, using my phone to document my movements and prove I was where I claimed to be. But the recordings came out wrong. In one, I heard myself walking ahead in the tunnel while I stood perfectly still, the footsteps echoing from a distance that didn't match the confined space. In another, my voice narrated observations about structural damage in a section I'd never inspected, describing cracks and water seepage with perfect accuracy, details I'd verify the next night, finding everything exactly as my voice had described. The door started appearing more frequently. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of it in my peripheral vision, only to find blank wall when I turned. Other times, I'd see it clearly at the end of a platform, passengers walking past without noticing, as if it existed only for me. 3 weeks into my documentation, I found another inspection tag. This one was dated 2 days ago, noting repairs I hadn't made to equipment I hadn't touched. But when I checked the switch box mentioned in the report, the repairs were complete, done with my particular methodology, the way I always routed the cables, the specific knot I used to secure loose wires. Someone who knew my work intimately had been here, or I had, in some timeline I couldn't access. My sleep became fractured. I'd dream of walking through the door, finding myself in an identical tunnel where everything ran backwards, trains reversing through stations, passengers walking in reverse, conversations playing from end to beginning. In these dreams, I'd meet myself coming from the opposite direction, and we'd pass without acknowledgement, like strangers who happened to share a face. The ozone smell began following me home. I'd catch whiffs of it in my apartment, always accompanied by the sensation that someone had just left the room. My neighbors complained about noise from my unit when I wasn't there. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, muffled conversations. The landlord threatened eviction if the disturbances continued. I returned to the door on a night when the tunnel lights flickered more than usual, creating a strobe effect that made movement feel disconnected from reality. The door was not just present but slightly ajar, a sliver of absolute darkness visible through the gap. No light from my headlamp penetrated that darkness. It simply swallowed the beam. As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, I heard my own voice from inside. Not an echo or recording, but clearly me, speaking to someone in tones too low to make out the words. The conversation had the rhythm of familiarity, like old friends catching up, then laughter. My laughter, but wrong somehow, as if it came from a throat that had been laughing for far too long. I reached for the handle. The metal was warm now, pulsing with that strange vibration I'd felt before. As my fingers closed around it, I felt another hand there, my hand, from the other side, pulling while I pushed. For a moment, we were connected through the door, two versions of the same person separated by metal and impossibility. The door began to open wider, and I saw myself standing in an identical tunnel, lit by the same flickering lights. But this other me looked wrong, not physically different, but wearing an expression I'd never seen in mirrors, a combination of recognition and hunger that made my skin crawl. He mouthed words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "Your turn." That's when I noticed the inspection tags hanging from his belt. Dozens of them, all dated differently, some from years past, others from years yet to come. He held up one, showing me my signature on a date that wouldn't exist for another decade. I stumbled backward, releasing the handle. The door swung shut with a sound like bones breaking. When I looked again, it was gone, leaving only that familiar semicircle of rust and the overwhelming sense that I'd narrowly escaped something irreversible. But escaped to where? And from what? The next morning I found a voicemail on my phone. My own voice, tired and resigned, explaining that I'd completed the overnight repairs in Tunnel 7. The timestamp showed 3:47 a.m., when I'd been lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to forget the hunger in my other self's eyes. I checked my work logs. The repairs were listed as complete, signed off with my employee number. My supervisor praised my efficiency when I arrived for my next shift, mentioning how she'd seen me leaving just as she arrived for the morning briefing, but I hadn't been there. Had I? The door appears every night now. Sometimes it's open, sometimes closed, but always present, always waiting. I've stopped trying to document it. The photos come out wrong. The videos show things that didn't happen or haven't happened yet. My coworkers avoid me, claiming I make them uncomfortable, though they can't explain why. They say I've changed, but when pressed for details, they just shake their heads and walk away. Last night I heard myself in the tunnel while I sat in the break room. Not just footsteps or voice, but the complete sound of me working, tools clanking, my habitual whistle when concentrating, even my specific pattern of profanity when something doesn't fit properly. I followed the sounds, finding fresh inspection tags with my signature, dated for tomorrow, next week, last month, all hanging from equipment I'd never touched. The worst part is the growing certainty that I have touched it. Will touch it. Am touching it right now, in some other iteration of this moment where the door never appeared or always existed or both simultaneously. I've started finding notes in my own handwriting, describing repairs I don't remember making to sections of tunnel I've never visited. But when I check these locations, the work is complete, done exactly as I would have done it. My phone contains photos I didn't take of damage I haven't seen, with my reflection visible in some of them, working diligently in places I've never been. Tonight I stand before the door again. It's open wide now, revealing not darkness, but another tunnel, another me, another door beyond that, and another, an infinite regression of tunnels and selves, all looking back at me with expressions ranging from confusion to understanding, to that terrible hunger I'd seen before. I can hear them all breathing, slightly out of sync, creating a rhythm that matches the pulse I've been feeling through the metal. They're all holding inspection tags, different dates, different years, different centuries maybe. Some look younger, some older, some exactly as I am now, but with eyes that have seen too much. One of them steps forward, or maybe I step forward, it's becoming hard to tell, and speaks in my voice. "We've been waiting for you to understand. The door doesn't appear and disappear. We do. Every time you walk past, you either enter or you don't, creating another one of us. And we all have work to do, repairs to make, tunnels to maintain across every possible version of this moment. I want to run, but I can see myself running in the other tunnels, see myself staying, see myself laughing, see myself screaming. All of it has happened, is happening, will happen. The inspection tag in my hand shows tomorrow's date, but also yesterday's, but also dates that calendars haven't reached yet. The ozone smell is overwhelming now, and I understand it's not from the door, it's from us. From the friction of existing in multiple states simultaneously, from the electrical discharge of consciousness splitting and reforming, with each decision to enter or not enter, to investigate or ignore, to believe or deny. My radio crackles with my own voice, reporting from 3 different locations at once. My supervisor responds to all of them, unfazed, as if this is how it's always been. And maybe it has. Maybe I've always been scattered across these tunnels, maintaining not just one system but all possible systems, fixing problems before they occur, after they're resolved, during their non-existence. I step through the door, or I don't, or I do both, and feel myself fragment and consolidate simultaneously. The tunnel ahead is familiar and alien, walked 1,000 times and never before. My footsteps echo ahead of me, behind me, beside me, the sound of infinite maintenance workers all wearing my face, all checking our watches, all seeing different times, all of them correct. The door closes, or stays open, or ceases to exist, or becomes the only thing that ever existed. I continue my shift, all of my shifts, none of my shifts, walking tunnels that branch and branch again, leaving inspection tags for myself to find, having conversations I'll remember but never experience, fixing things that break, because I fixed them, breaking things that were never whole. Somewhere, in another tunnel or the same tunnel or no tunnel at all, another me is writing this report, has written it, will write it. The words appear on pages I'll never see, in handwriting that's mine but wrong, describing events that absolutely happened and absolutely didn't. The semicircle of rust remains, growing larger each day, or smaller, or staying exactly the same size. It's the only constant, the only proof that the door exists or existed or will exist. I step over it carefully, or carelessly, or I don't step at all. My radio crackles again. My voice, reporting completion of repairs that haven't been assigned yet. My supervisor responds, thanks me for my dedication, mentions that I've been doing excellent work lately. All of me has. Every version, every iteration, maintaining tunnels that exist in states of constant flux, keeping the trains running on time through realities that overlap and diverge and collapse back into themselves. I check my phone. 17 missed calls from myself. 43 photos I didn't take. A video of me explaining something I don't understand yet, but will, eventually, in some timeline, where this all makes sense. The door is waiting when I return. It's always waiting. Sometimes I'm already there, holding it open, gesturing for myself to enter. Sometimes I'm walking out as I'm walking in, nodding in acknowledgement of a shared understanding I don't yet possess. The ozone smell has become comforting now, familiar as my own reflection. All my reflections, staring back from the polished metal of the door that exists in every state simultaneously. I've stopped trying to determine which side I'm on. There are no sides, just an endless circulation of selves maintaining an infinite system that requires our constant attention. Tomorrow, I'll find an inspection tag dated today. Yesterday, I found one dated tomorrow. Time has become negotiable, a suggestion rather than a rule. The door doesn't care about causality, and neither do I anymore. Or I care too much, or I never cared at all. The tunnel stretches ahead, behind, beside, within. I walk it forever, for the first time, for the last time, never walking it at all. The trains pass through on schedule, through me, around me, because of me, despite me. I am the maintenance, I am the malfunction. I am the door, and the absence of the door, and the rust that marks where the door might have been. My shift ends. My shift continues. My shift never started. I go home to an apartment full of inspection tags for work I've completed in futures that haven't arrived, sleep in a bed that remembers the weight of all my bodies, dream of tunnels that dream of me. And tomorrow, every tomorrow, no tomorrow, only tomorrow, the door will be waiting, and I'll discover what I've always known. I've already walked through it. I'm walking through it now. I never left. Story 8. The first anomaly happened 3 weeks after I moved into the Austin house. Tuesday, 2:04 a.m. The basement lights flickered on while I lay in bed, heart suddenly racing for no reason I could name. Through the smart home app on my phone, I watched the activity log populate in real time. Basement lights. On. Automated routine number 7. I hadn't created any routine number 7. The house had been a steal. A foreclosure in Travis Heights with all the smart tech already installed. The previous owner had apparently gone all in on home automation before defaulting on the mortgage. Every outlet, every bulb, every lock answered to the central hub. I'd spent the first week just figuring out how to turn on the coffee maker without voice commands. Now, staring at that unauthorized routine, I felt the particular kind of unease that comes from technology doing something you didn't tell it to do. I disabled the routine and went back to sleep, chalking it up to some preset I'd missed during setup. By Thursday, there were 3 new routines. The app showed them clearly. Rain sounds, living room, 3:17 a.m., back door unlock, duration, 17 seconds, 4:45 a.m., temperature adjustment, master bedroom, lower 4 degrees, 5:30 a.m. Each tagged with the same identifier, created by guest user. I was the only user on the system. The house felt different that morning. Not overtly, nothing I could point to and say, there, that's wrong. More like the sensation of walking into a room where people have just stopped talking about you. The air itself seemed attentive. I called tech support while making coffee, the automated grinder drowning out hold music. When someone finally answered, they walked me through security protocols, password resets, 2-factor authentication. Everything checked out clean. No breaches, no unauthorized access. The rep suggested maybe I'd pocket-dialed some settings. Pocket-dialed a routine called Rain Sounds at 3:17 a.m.? I asked. Uncomfortable silence. Then, the system does have learning capabilities. Sometimes it creates efficiency routines based on usage patterns. I hung up knowing they didn't believe that any more than I did. That night, I sat in my living room with my laptop, monitoring the hub's activity log. The house hummed around me. Refrigerator cycling, HVAC, breathing through vents, the subtle electronic whisper of dozens of connected devices maintaining their vigilance. At 11 p.m., I noticed my fitness tracker showing elevated heart rate, 108 beats per minute. I was sitting still, reading. At 11:47 p.m., the back door unlocked. Not suddenly. The smart lock turned with deliberate slowness, each internal pin sliding with mechanical precision. The app showed the command in real time. Back door, unlocked, guest user. My heart rate spiked to 127 beats per minute. I stood, laptop forgotten, and approached the door. Through the glass, the backyard stretched into darkness. The pool lights I hadn't turned on reflecting ghost patterns on the water. The door was indeed unlocked. I locked it manually, then digitally, then placed a chair against it for good measure. The lock turned again while I watched. Slow, methodical. My fitness tracker buzzed, 142 beats per minute. This time I pulled the chair away and yanked the door open, half expecting, what? An intruder? A neighbor? The yard stood empty, night air thick with Texas humidity. Motion sensors should have triggered the floodlights if anything had moved out there. The logs showed nothing. I slept poorly, waking every hour to check the app. New routines appeared like digital fungi. Hallway temperature, increased 2 degrees, 2:15 a.m. Kitchen blinds, open 15%, 3:33 a.m. White noise, all speakers, volume 3, 4 a.m. Friday morning brought a new development. Photos in my cloud storage I hadn't taken. The images were dark, grainy, but unmistakably my bedroom. Low angles, as if captured from floor level. In one, I could make out my own form under covers, face slack with sleep. The timestamp, 3:33 a.m., the exact moment the kitchen blinds had opened 15%. My hands shook as I scrolled through them. 17 photos total, each from slightly different positions around my bed. The last one made my stomach lurch. It showed my face in profile, so close the lens must have been inches away. My fitness tracker data for that time showed a spike to 95 beats per minute while sleeping. My body had known something was wrong even while unconscious. I disconnected the internet that afternoon, thinking it would stop whatever was happening. The router powered down with a satisfied click. For an hour, blessed silence. No new routines, no unauthorized commands. I actually started to relax, convinced I'd found the solution. Then the basement lights turned on. Without internet, the smart hub shouldn't have been able to process any command.